That's me and you. Do we make it sound easy?
I have no idea. It's not.
It's not. It's not. Abby's going to start us off.
I'm going to start today's creative talk with birds. So a while ago, I was interviewing a bird researcher, and she told me this story about another bird researcher, a friend of hers, who went out into the woods and collected a bunch of wild songbirds and took them back into the lab, tagged them, and tested their blood for different hormonal levels, right? And then she set the birds back out into the woods free, and a little while later went back out, recollected those wild birds, and then collected a whole new set of wild birds that had never been touched before. Took them all back into her laboratory, tested their blood again, and she noticed that the first batch of birds who had been captured that first time were different from the other set of birds. Their blood, the level of hormones, was different. And she concluded that the reason was because they had been captured before. They had been touched and captured by the wild bird researcher. And something about them, just in that interaction, had fundamentally changed the birds. And they were forever different. And that's always stuck with me as an apt metaphor for the act of journalism. Basically, journalists are the bird researchers, and you guys and the public are all tiny little wild birds flitting around in the universe, completely unaware. And then we come out and we're like, oh, I think you would be a good person to tell a story. Can we interview you? And as soon as that word clicks into place, you're on the record, and something is fundamentally changed.
Which leads me to a confession, which I'm making for the first time here before you all, which is the secret to how we do our work at Invisibilia, and that is mind control. Yes, we can move pencils and people with our minds. I joined Invisibilia in its second season, and I was inducted into the secret society in my very, very first story. The story was about some men who worked on an oil rig, and this kind of insane experiment they did on an oil rig where they tried to improve the safety on the rig by teaching the men for a year and a half how to share their feelings, how to open up and talk about their lives and just be kind of real with each other. So Elise was teaching me how to do radio. She and I went down to Mississippi and Louisiana. We interviewed these guys, and in the course of the interviews, one word kept coming up. Let's hear it.
It felt vulnerable. You put your personal life out there for everybody to hear and everybody to see.
Here it is again.
So you don't want to show your vulnerability to anybody.
And?
I didn't want to be vulnerable.
So, anybody here from the South? Woo! Okay, so we all know that, Southern men, in my experience, are really good storytellers. They can spin a story into a myth. They're wonderful to talk to. But in interview after interview, I kept hearing this single word come back up, vulnerable. And I thought to myself, how did this word get there? And the answer is mind control. We put that word inside their heads during the interviews. We kept using the word vulnerable, so they started to use the word vulnerable, and that's how it works. John Oliver has something to say about that.
60 Minutes anchors prompting people to deliver the exact soundbite they need.
You gotta hand it to him.
Yes, you do.
He was off and running.
He was off and running.
One way of dealing with his anxiety
is to laugh at it.
Is to laugh at it.
So it drives the price up.
You did everything together.
Everything together. With that cartoon.
With that cartoon.
He is sort of the father of hot sauce.
He's the father of hot sauce.
That surprised you? It does surprise me.
And you're saying we shouldn't?
I think we shouldn't.
There's no reason to prepare.
No reason to prepare.
And that's essentially a commercial for GoPro.
It's really funny.
You should watch it.
Anyway, believe me, it's a phenomenon. So any of you have listened to Invisibilia, we are not a soundbite kind of show. That's not our problem. But the reason that it bothered me to hear this word vulnerable over and over again is because I, for most of my career, was a print journalist. I worked for The Atlantic. I wrote cover stories with big booming headlines like "The End of Men" or "The Overprotected Kid." And I would just like give you my big theory. And I was tired of hearing myself talk and talk and talk and talk. So I came to radio so that I could be quiet. And then I listened to this tape and I'm like, wow, like it's not just me talking, it's me like putting my words into somebody else and then they're talking back at me like a parrot. And that was like a nightmare. Like I had created a Frankenstein parrot, and so maybe, you know, radio was not all it was cracked up to be for me. And so that is why we came here today to talk to you about the parrot trap. And escaping the parrot trap. The parrot trap is this idea that, you know, you have thoughts in your head and a way that you want to approach things and do things, and that process can trap you in some ways. You can get trapped in your own thoughts. And the beauty of radio, for those of us who make it and for you guys who listen to it, is that you actually get somebody else's consciousness, their most intimate thoughts kind of piped into your own head, and it allows your thoughts to kind of quiet down. And if you do it properly, it's like a genuine relief. It's just tiresome to live with your own thoughts for your entire life. So it's really, really nice to have somebody else's thoughts in there. So we are going to talk about escaping the parrot traps, how it works, and give you a few escape routes. Okay, step one, the interview. At Invisibilia, the interview is not a spontaneous process. We just don't go in there and kind of chat with people about their thoughts and feelings. It is this really elaborate process which begins with what we call story preps. You want to do a demonstration of what a story prep looks like? It's insane, so go ahead.
Well, so this is from the story that I did on Tanya Marquardt, who is a sleep talker. I think in the end, the story ended up being like 12 minutes long. And this was the story prep for my first interview with her, and it's 13 pages.
Yeah.
So like a 13-page interview prep, like to get through 13 questions, it took 8 hours. I was there for 4 days, 4 hours the first day, and then 4 hours the second day.
That's just for the first interview with Tanya.
And
so
then
anyway,
you boil it down to like 6 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. So these are really, really necessary, and they're really, really instructive to our process, because essentially it's like a story you can think of as kind of the big wild woods, and it's totally untamed. And the process of creating a story process is the process of sort of carving yourself a few paths through those woods. You're like, oh, I got this. This is one theory about what this story could be about, or this is another theory, and you're kind of working out what the story can be about so that when you go into the interview, you feel a little like you got this and you're on top of it. But then what happens is life. You go into the interview, you encounter the person, and we're going to show you an example here. This is a story I did about a tailor, and I was interviewing him. He had survived concentration camps when he was a teenager, and it was about how a shirt had saved his life. And now this tailor was in his late 80s, maybe 90s. He was mostly deaf. I was interviewing him in the tailor shop, which is incredibly loud. He was really, really hungry. And this was the first interview that I had done by myself with nobody else with me. So I was incredibly nervous, and I came in like ripping my interview prep, and I'm like, I'm doing this interview about how this damn shirt saved your life. And here's what actually happened. Would you say that the shirt saved your life?
I don't know if the shirt saved my life, but I know that I felt better because I was cleaned. I was dressed like I used to be dressed.
And you don't think it saved you?
The shirt has too many questions about the shirt. The shirt was just a shirt to me. That's it.
And you're like, oh, like a little part of you dies inside. You're like, that's my path, old man. Like, just walk down the path. Damn it, you know? And so what is the lesson learned here? It's like you've carved this path, and this guy has just like dumped a big boulder in the middle of your path. And so how do you escape this? Like your head is one way, and like it's not going that way. Basically, you sit on the boulder, and you pay attention. And this isn't a creative constraint. It's like a creative resistance. Like you have to be tuned in the moments in an interview when you are facing like severe creative resistance. And the reason you have to be tuned into it is because my experience in print and radio shows me that that's when the story gets great. That's the moment when somebody pushes back against the thoughts you have in your head is the moment when you actually understand what's going on. So what happened with my friend the tailor was, he was like, screw the shirt. This shirt belonged to a Nazi. The fact that I wore this shirt on my body and flipped the collar up every day was a sign to them that I was an individual. The shirt is irrelevant. It belonged to a Nazi. It showed them that I was not a number and that I was a person who could defy them. It was about him inside himself. It was not about the damn stupid shirt. So that is a moment when the story actually became the story. So just sit on the boulder. That's our advice there. Okay, second parrot trap.
So one of the big moments in a piece of radio is when you bring the character, and we do often call them characters, when you bring the character on stage, like the first words that you hear and the music that they sort of walk on the stage with. And it's your first impression, it's the audience's first impression. And like we all are really anal about, managing our first impressions when we have like a first date or a job interview. I think the question that we had for your name tag today was like, is there an article of clothing that you have or like something that you wear when you really want to make a good impression? Does anybody want to just like shout out?
I usually wear this skirt, actually. Anybody else have
I liked
more?
your other answer though.
Oh, it's perfume that I wear because it just throws people off. It's like kind of weird to wear perfume and it's like a little aggressive.
She said not just perfume, but like kind of an obnoxious perfume.
Yeah. It's slightly inappropriate, so I want to appear like slightly inappropriate.
Does anybody else like to be inappropriate?
Just shout out anything that you said. Anything. What was that?
Me
Red
too.
lipstick. Nice.
Yep.
Nice. Anything else? Penguin suit. Very nice. One suit. That's pretty good. One more. Anybody? Shoes, earrings, anything? What was that? Earrings, a particular
Those
set.
are lovely earrings.
Nice.
Yeah. Do you have somewhere important to be today? Is this it?
This is it. It's for us.
Thank you. We are impressed. So, when we're bringing a character into a story, we're not. It's like the most important first date ever because it's like for 2.5 million people
are gonna meet you.
Yeah, for the first time. So those first words and that music that they walk on stage with, I mean, it just really matters. It's the thing that is gonna stick with the listener and kind of sort of is the listener gonna be bought in to what this person is saying, gonna be interested in their perspective and their life story. So I wanna talk for a minute about the case of the Syrian refugee. This is from a story I think we did back in season 3. And I mean, Syrian refugees were in the news all of the time at this moment. And the Syrian refugee whose story we were telling wasn't just a refugee, but they had also been orphaned in Syria. And so they grew up in an orphanage, and then they had been homeless for a while as a teenager in Lebanon. So it was just sad on top of sad on top of sad. And we couldn't figure out how to introduce this guy. So Hanna and I brought this story to the team for edits at 15, 20 times.
And it's a 4-minute story. We just couldn't get it right.
I mean, it's just one of our tops. It kind of sets up the premise of the show. So this is a place where we sort of
thought we should
start. Yeah.
When he was in his early teens, Chris spent a year and a half homeless in Damascus and then in Beirut.
Just running around, trying to find a job, trying to find something to eat, just trying to survive.
It was horrible.
2 of my friends died, and anxiety and depression started kicking me really hard.
So, the air kept getting sucked out of the room when we would start there. And, but more importantly, I mean, we weren't, that people were sort of saturated with these horrific, stories of what was going on in Syria and Syrian refugees. And we hadn't, said anything new or said anything different or said anything to make you really want to like tune in and listen. And this guy was, he had this dream of becoming a DJ. And that's sort of what the story was going to be about, like our future selves and how they can drag us along in our lives. And so we had this moment of just inspiration where we just like drove backwards. I mean, we just like backed the fuck up, you know? And we decided to just like start in a totally different place. And if you're fans of the show, you know that we always end on a dance party. And so this is how we decided in the end to just kind of like back up, take a total left turn. Like, let's just introduce this guy in a very different way.
Hanna?
Yeah?
Today, we start with a dance party. Picture a big hall with like 300 kids, everybody crowded in and sweaty, getting funky. The one very unusual thing about this dance party, though, it's in an orphanage in Syria.
Yeah, it was awesome. I still remember everybody was just dancing.
This is Chris Sedek. He was one of the kids at the party, which happened back in 2007.
That's an unusual way to start a story about a sad Syrian refugee who was homeless, yes.
Which sort of like just opens you up, you know, to the possibility of where is this story going to take me. So sometimes just back up, take a left turn, just go in just try something that's like drastically different from what you've been doing. And then the next thing is about finger puppet time.
Oh, it's finger puppet time.
So
yes,
this,
sorry.
This is like when you have to make decisions about what to keep in the story and what to leave out of the story. And it's also when war breaks out, the Parrot Trap War, between the writer, like me, and the editor, like Hanna. And this happened when I was working on the story about Tanya Marquardt, who is the sleep talker. She had written to us, and she said that, you know, she recorded herself sleep talking every single night, and she would wake up in the morning and she would listen back to all of these recordings that she had made, and she felt like the voice that was in these recordings was like this innocent, sweet little child, and she was like, who the hell is that inside of me? Like, I don't recognize that at all. I really want to meet this little girl that's inside of me, and I think she has like a story for my life. And so we were like, okay, let's go do an interview with her. So I did my, 15 hours of interviews or whatever, and the vast majority of this time was spent talking about her dark past, like talking about how her child was anything but like innocent. We talked a lot about her mom and like the way in which her mom had sort of picked her brother and her up from school in the middle of the day, and they had like secretly run away from her father with like a police escort. We talked about like how her father wasn't necessarily sexually abusive, but how he would kind of like leave porn magazines around the house and like talk to her.
Talk about this for 50 hours, which is why the editor has to come in and be like stop already, you know? Like what happens is you get in your own head and you're like.
Well, you don't just get in your own head, like you just go and spend all this time with this person and they give you like all of this stuff and you're just like, Hanna, the world needs to see this stuff. You know what I mean? And she's like, no, narrative arc, and you're like, no, all of my stuff.
And Abby's like, you're putting me in a trap. You're just trying to make her into a stereotype, and we have to make her into a particular person. And I'm like, Jesus, we're not her therapist. Like our job is not. We have to, you know. And so it's like, who's putting who in the trap? Whose head is getting in the way? That's the war that breaks out here between writer and editor, which in this case she was the writer and I was the editor on this story. We switch around all the time, but that's what it was on this story. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves in this situation is, what would Walt Whitman do? What am I talking about? So there's a moment when Walt Whitman is walking down a New York City street and has a kind of transcendental experience where he inhabits the consciousness of other people. And so I don't care like what kind of visionary, and I'm sure you are all amazing visionaries and that your vision is perfect and whole. As a creative person and an artist, part of part of your vision is communicating your vision. So the transcendental moment that you need at some point in the process, it doesn't have to infect your mind, but at some point in the process is to inhabit the mind of the person that you are trying to communicate with. So as an editor, that is my message to Abby. Get out of your own kind of head, which has now become Tanya's head, and move into the brain of the person you're trying to communicate with, have a momentary transcendental experience, and so
in the opposite direction.
In the opposite direction, inhabit the mind of the person you want to talk to, and this is what we ended up going with.
Like, this is how much darkness we decided.
Yeah.
When she was a kid, her dad spent evenings sitting in the den, smoking, drinking. Tanya remembers that on some nights, like after she'd broken a plate, he'd call her in.
There was this foyer in my house, and it had these hard kind of gray tiles. They're like stone tiles, you know, so they're not completely flat. And he would make us stand in the corner but on our knees, and he would make us pull our pant legs up so that our knees were exposed. And anytime you turn, you know, he would yell at us or come towards us. So it's like terrifying for a child.
He'd leave her to kneel there till her knees went numb.
Till he passed out. And then my mom would come and take me to bed.
We decided in the end that we just really needed one strong, clear image that would stick with you, that would make you understand why Tanya was in search of the light. Just enough darkness that would make you yearn with her for something that would kind of open her up.
But no more. That would distract you.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next parrot trap. Truth may be stranger than fiction, but sometimes fiction hits the nail on the head. The example we're going to use in this case is a story we did called Emotions from the last season. This story, the main narrative of this story, involved a trucker who got into an accident with a smaller car, and a child died in the car. And even though it was not the trucker's fault in any way, he was consumed by guilt and terror at what had happened in this car. So Elise and I built this story together. We built it up in the attic of my house, and we just separated the sections. You make this section, I'll make this section. So I was in charge of making the section of when Tommy, the trucker's trauma starts to hit him. So I was like, okay, I got this. I know I'm a good reporter. Hanna knows what she's doing. I know how to do a timeline. I'm like, first this happened, then that happened, then this happened, then he went in here, and then he went in the truck, and then I got it, So I go through all my tape, and I pick the best section of first, second, third, fourth, fifth. And then the way we did it is Elise would listen to my section, I would listen to her section. So then she came back upstairs. She was working in my son's room. She came back up to the attic, and I played her the section. And she gave me a tepid clap. She was like, nice, Hanna, pat on the head. That was good, got it. It's very good. Now why don't you make a section where I can actually feel something? Where I can actually feel what Tommy's trauma was like. So I was like, sure, what do I do, That's what happened. So what do I do? That's not exactly what happened. And I just started to sit with it. And maybe we'll just play it before I explain why I did it this way. Let's just play what I ultimately decided to create.
The day after the accident, after a tortured night in a motel room, Tommy's trucking company put him on a plane to go home. He got in his seat, fastened his seatbelt. Would you like something to drink, sir?
Her little arm hanging out of the car. I couldn't get none of them images out of my mind. Her little arm hanging out of the car. You got to get a grip on this.
But he couldn't. On the plane, he was aware of the person sitting to his left, the person in front of him, but he couldn't look any of them in the eye. He thought it was obvious.
They knew I killed a child. I was a killer. I was like, how could I have done this? I killed a child. And I was a piece of shit for doing it.
Now, was all of Tommy's trauma contained in the minute he snatched his seatbelt and sat on the airplane? Of course not. But what we did there was create a single, spare, kind of poetic feeling, because we've all been on an airplane, or many people have been on an airplane, that feeling of being trapped, of having politeness around you, lots of strangers looking at you, no place to escape to or walk to, and your mind is having these kind of insane, vivid, panicked thoughts, and you're just kind of trapped there. And so we just like pared down, you know, a period of weeks into 5 minutes of before a plane takes off. And you can just feel, like, you can just feel in that incident sort of all of the trauma just kind of sitting on top of him. And so the point there is, like, when you go into a story, like, or whatever it is your process, you just kind of have the kind of the beats laid out in your head, like you have the timeline. But what you're actually trying to convey is not like the truth of this happened, this happened, this happened, but an emotional truth, something you can't necessarily see or write a PowerPoint about or write a schedule about, but you're not trying to sort of clock the time, you're trying to clock the heartbeats, like you're trying to clock sort of what the feeling was like more than what the beat by beat was like. So that's how you get out of the trap of like, this happened, that happened. Okay. We're going to do our final one, which is the most difficult one, which is the happy ending trap. The happy ending problem, it's more accurately would be like the resolution problem. Like every story sort of like arcs towards a resolution. This is, if you want to think of it as a problem, it's a problem with Invisibilia, but it's a problem everywhere. Like how many TV shows have you watched, or movies, or things that you yourself have created, or stories you've told that don't kind of have a problem that then gets resolved? This way of sort of thinking and telling stories is just kind of hardwired into us. There's something just deeply satisfying about having a problem and then having the problem be resolved.
It's like when you're in 4th grade and your teacher is like, the story starts and then there's the climax and then there's the resolution, you know? Like it's like ingrained in us when we're like 7 or 8 years old.
Yeah, yeah. So, the Tanya story,
yeah, with the sleep talker story, in the end she found the light.
It was traumatic, and then she found the light.
Then she found the light.
Surprise.
Yes,
yeah.
And I mean, we did a lot of different interesting things. She did dream incubation stuff. We went and saw a hypnotist. There was like a lot of, you know, wandering around in the murk and like trying to find the light. But she did. And here's how that piece ended.
There's a place inside of me that I've personified as this little girl that is not wounded and can never be wounded. That is like the idea of that, of like getting more of that feeling in my life is an incredible relief. Like, how incredible would that be? That would be amazing. And I think that that's what is being offered to me, actually.
Tanya's started to accept that offer. She's been calling her grandpa in Canada to catch up, going for long bike rides alone just to feel the wind on her face. Little ways that she can see proof of X playing in broad daylight.
I'm happy.
She actually says, I'm happy.
In her sleep.
In her sleep.
Yeah, and I mean, all of that is real and true. Like that's where, you know, we left the reporting, and that's how she felt. I mean, I at one point like went to New York and she slept, and I like sat on the ground in her apartment next to her all night long while she slept, waiting to kind of meet X and try to do an interview, you know? And I think that that resolution tape might come from the next morning when we were just sort of talking about it.
Did we ever look at the waves of the tape of when you interviewed her sleeping? It's probably like boring, boring,
and then it's like,
right?
You know, yeah. It was really an amazing reporting experience. I enjoyed it a lot. So like, okay, the story's done. And like we sort of put it to bed. I don't think it had been published yet, but we had put it to bed. And I went back to New York for something else. And Tanya is a performing artist. She's a dancer. And so she had created her own performance piece about the sleep talking experience that she has. And I go and I like sit in the first row and I'm really excited and the lights, you know, go down and it's the final scene and she's just sitting on a chair in the center of the stage. It's pitch black and she's got like a bike light that she's shining under her chin, like in the Blair Witch Project or whatever. And she's telling the story from her runaway days when she was a teenager and like she talks about going to this party and like sleeping on this mattress and this strange man gets into the bed and touches her thigh and then that's it. And then the lights go up and it's over and everybody's like
not happy.
Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, did the arc of the happy ending, you know, necessary like desire that we have, did that, am I like a horrible journalist? You know what I mean? Like, how can I tell this story in such a way where it ends in this happy, beautiful place? And she tells this story and it ends and it sounds like maybe she's about to get raped. So I called up Tanya to kind of ask, you know, what was going on.
Out of guilt.
Out of guilt, yeah. Well, and out of like fear of, you know, like being a really bad journalist, like, you know, like, and what did I fundamentally misinterpret something? Yeah. There we go.
Like everyone that came that night, they were like, "I am deeply disturbed. I am very disturbed. I am going to have trouble sleeping tonight." That's what someone said to me. I was like, "Okay, good to know. Very clear audience feedback." And the piece doesn't end at that point anymore. I mean, and
where does it end now?
Like, it ends with this really beautiful dance, with this really beautiful kind of like happy, giddy, childlike music.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a totally different thing that happens. And then my one friend that came to both shows, she was like, "This version is much better."
Mm. When you ended it in a place that made people so uncomfortable, like
mm-hmm.
in your own life, you don't necessarily go skipping off into the sunset.
No, it's a real moment by moment thing because trauma is one of those things that you learn to carry that part of yourself through the world. Yeah, there's no neat sort of tidy like red bow, like I'm healed. It's not like that.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, if there is something, are we giving a false expectation when we tell stories that end in like a resolved place? Because life...
No. It's actually very satisfying because trauma by its kind of nature is really disparate and broken. So once you see like a story, it's very satisfying.
But that's my question, you know, like, is there something blinding about our desire to see that narrative and to be satisfied?
I think so, but I think that that the only way to find some sort of calming or even like some sense of deeper understanding is to create stories.
I cannot tell you all how important this conversation between Abby and Tanya was to my creative process. It was really moving to me because I feel like as a journalist or a creator of stories of any kind, you do carry with you this guilt that you have this compulsion to resolve every damn thing. And to hear Tanya sort of reframe that as, that is, what I understood her to say was, that is how we humans communicate to each other. We can't communicate our entire truth through stream of consciousness and like the broken, disparate parts of our, you know, trauma or happiness or whatever it is. It's just not a way of talking. And so to me, it suddenly felt like something more, now I feel silly having the finger puppet making this very serious moment, but, but to me, it felt like what she was saying is like, I I turn my mess into a story so that I can give it to you and talk to you about it. And then you turn your mess into a story so you can talk to me about it, and kind of that's how we connect. And that's how I understood what she was saying. And so the conclusion of that is, this trap of we are in our heads and we just can't help ourselves. We like push everything towards a resolution is not a trap that we can create an escape route for. We can't do it for you. But the escape route that I understood is, so you tell one story, like Abby tells one story about Tanya's reality and gives it to the world, and then Tanya tells another story, and Abby just told you guys a third story about this whole thing. And so the only escape route I can think of is you can just keep telling stories, and all of those stories are resolved, but you can just keep telling them as much as you want.
And I sort of disagree. I mean, I think that
I was trying to have a rousing, like resolved ending.
Yeah, no, I know. I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know you do. Yeah, and I mean, I think, honestly, I think the world needs both. I think, I think sometimes stories help us get out of bed in the morning. And I think that sometimes I went and I saw a talk that
Hannah Nicole Jones.
Thank you. At the Third Coast Audio Festival, and she said that she refuses. She does a lot of reporting on city schools and stuff, and it's bad news, and so she won't end the story in a resolved way because she wants to piss off the audience. She wants the audience to read the story, to feel unsatisfied, to be angry, because maybe that anger will motivate them to go and fix a fucked up situation, right? And I think that sometimes we really need those kinds of stories in the world. We need those stories that make us mad and make us want to go do something about it. And that can get us out of bed in the morning. And then I think sometimes we get so weighted down by all of the horrible stuff. And what we need are stories that do kind of offer us, a window. They offer in light and they feel like they give us hope. And so I think we just need both. Happy endings and not.
Okay. Well, we'll end on the pissed off ending, which might motivate you to stand up and ask us some questions.
So I know people have to go to work. There's some people already sneaking out, but we may be able to do two quick questions. 2 questions. We have a mic right here. It's a race to the mic.
We have
right
one
here.
Question over there. Oh, it's a race to the mic. I guess you have to go to the mic.
Yeah, you have to go to the mic.
That's intimidating.
There we go. Look at that. We make you work for it here.
Yeah.
So in the...
What's your name?
Lauren.
Lauren, hi.
Hi. In the direction of craft and you guys telling these stories, and of course everyone is individual, but do you ever get stuck or feel repetitive or don't feel creative thinking, I have to create a story, I have to interview someone, I have to do this. There's all of these template things. I guess I'm asking is, what do you get bored with or stuck with, and how do you move on from that? Because each one is individual, but sometimes it feels like the same thing over to you.
Like we're telling the same story.
I mean, I know that Hanna gets frustrated with having to do sit-down interviews. Fundamentally, that is something that I think is a little bit... She told me this great story. When she used to do print reporting, she would sit down and do the kind of standard confessional interview like we do on the radio. But when she was doing print, she would do that because the people she was interviewing expected it. And then she would throw out those notes and just hang around for dinner. And that's where like all of the material would actually come from.
I think, the thing that I said about the interview, I totally know what you're feeling. And often in the middle of an interview, I will just put the prep in my bag. Don't tell Elise this, please. Nobody tell this to Elise, but I put it away because I think it's not that dissimilar to when you are with a friend, or someone you even know really well. Like you run through the grooves and that takes up the first 20 minutes. And then you just kind of, you become very present and you shift somewhere. It's like an autopilot. You can feel yourself moving from autopilot to presence. Like I truly believe that if you are actually just there, like you'll find something real. Like everybody has something real, especially when you're talking to strangers who you're almost always interviewing. There's definitely something you don't know or didn't expect when you walked into the room. And so you just have to like have faith and wait for it. And you can't do that by just following the script you had in your head before you got there because you don't know what's unexpected. That's why it's unexpected. So you just have to like put it away and have faith.
And pay attention. Yeah. I mean, I think any of the things that we do could kind of feel like at some point they get a little boring or we've just done them before. But I think if you just try and pay attention to the fact that you're talking to a completely different human being and they have a completely different perspective of the world, that is constantly refreshing.
Yeah,
and it's a privilege.
Is because you came there with an idea of what this was going to be.
Yeah. We're boring.
Yeah. Well,
They're
you've
not.
lived with yourself for a really long
Right.
time, so you're boring to yourself. And
Right.
so you just have to move yourself out of the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mark.
Hi, Mark.
And, so when you do an interview and you're in the editing room, you can kind of create the person in the editing room. Like you can kind of create whatever character you want.
Hell
So
yeah,
how do you resolve that and make sure to not reduce it down to some stereotype or some just general picture, instead try to get a bit deeper to show who they really are?
Oh my God, I can't tell you what a terrible power it is. It was different in print because it's your own voice talking, but in radio, sometimes I feel like super evil puppet man, because it's like you're using the person's voice, and you can use them to make them into, it's a very weird feeling, I gotta say, as a relative newbie to radio.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, to the best of your ability, you try and understand what it is that they're trying to communicate. And you're open to them disagreeing with you, and you try to give them a fair representation.
I mean, our process involves a lot of back and forth with the person, so we don't just go into a room and disappear. We keep talking to the person and we check everything by the person, and so it has to be some, while there's honesty about the fact that you are controlling the creative reins, there's also honesty about this kind of, the thing that I was talking about where you are sharing space in radio. It's not just your voice, you're sometimes just a quarter of the actual sound time as the person creating the radio, and you're actually ceding space to the person themselves. So I think in radio anyway, it's a lot about sort of understanding what power you have, and sort of submitting to their presence in a lot of ways.
But you're also helping people become articulate. You know what I mean? Oftentimes they're talking about something that they might not totally understand themselves, and through the process of talking with us about it, they come to a more solid understanding for at least in terms of that moment. You know what I mean? It's like when you're at a dinner party or something and somebody's going on and on and on and on and on, and it's that there's something good there somewhere, but there's all of this excess stuff, and so we're also helping the individual kind of say the most profound thing that they have to say about it.
I mean, an Invisibilia interview is a 10-hour therapy session,
Yeah.
so it is really kind of a co-creation. They really do take a long time, and you're trying to open up a gigantic space for someone to understand what it is that they've been through themselves. So you're co-creating a version of themselves that might not exist elsewhere in the world, but exists in this 10-hour interview space. It's really exhausting.
And I think that we're trying, and I think that we're interested in experimenting going forward with just trying to find ways to get tape and put tape on air that is that helps bring the individuality out more. Like that's something that we're constantly trying to think about and explore.
Maybe we'll end on this because I know you said only 2 questions. Anyone, and you are all creative, beautiful people. You look great, as we all decided. And we would like you to pitch us. So we always welcome pitches from everyone. We've gotten many wonderful pitches from Invisibilia fans and listeners. So here's Liana. What email should they pitch to, Liana? It's pitch. Invisibiliamail@npr.org. And we read every single one. So please send them to us. That's all we have time for, right?
That is.
Thank
Let's
you,
give them
guys.
a huge round of applause.